Imagine a world where the map is fully drawn, where every mountain has been measured and every valley has been peered into by satellites. We live in an era of total surveillance, where the unknown has been squeezed into the smallest, darkest corners of our collective imagination. Yet, across every culture and every continent, a persistent shadow lingers, a heavy, bipedal silhouette that refuses to step into the light of proof. Whether we call it the Yeti, Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, the myth of the wild man is one of humanity's most enduring and universal ghost stories. It is a creature that exists exactly where we aren't, a biological anomaly that defies the very laws of ecology and population density we understand. For decades, enthusiasts and researchers have scoured the densest forests of the Pacific Northwest and the frozen peaks of the Himalayas for a sign. They seek a relic from our own evolutionary past, a bridge between the sophisticated humans we became and the primal beasts we left behind. To understand why this mystery persists, we have to look past the blurry photos and into the deep evolutionary psychology of the human mind. Our ancestors spent millions of years as prey, scanning the tree line for shapes that didn't belong, developing a brain tuned to detect hidden predators. This hyperactive agency detection means we are hardwired to see a face in the leaves and a lurking giant in the snap of a twig. But the legend isn't just a trick of the light, it is often rooted in the very real, very physical history of our planet's megafauna. During the Pleistocene, humans didn't just share the Earth with mammoths, but with massive, towering apes that would dwarf a modern grizzly bear. Gigantopithecus blacki, the largest primate to ever live, roamed the forests of Southeast Asia for nearly 2 million years, before vanishing into mystery. It stood nearly 3 meters tall and weighed half a ton, a real-life King Kong that likely crossed paths with our own early human relatives. Is it possible that the Bigfoot of our modern nightmares is actually a genetic memory of a monster that our ancestors truly feared? Fossil evidence discovered by researchers like Ralph von Koenigswald in the 1930s confirmed that these giants weren't just myths, but flesh and bone. Yet, science requires more than a tooth or a memory to declare a species alive. It requires a breeding population, a habitat, and a trail. In the hunt for the Yeti, modern science has recently stepped in with the most powerful tool in the biological arsenal: environmental DNA. Researchers have analyzed hair samples and footprints from across the globe, hoping to find a genetic sequence that doesn't match anything on record. The results of these studies, however, take us away from the world of monsters and back into the surprising reality of the animal kingdom. In 2014, a major study led by geneticist Brian Sykes of Oxford University analyzed 30 hair samples attributed to anomalous primates. The rigorous DNA testing revealed that the legendary Yeti was not a hidden ape, but a genetic match for an ancient polar bear. This highlights a fascinating biological phenomenon. We often mistake the familiar for the fantastic when we are pushed to our psychological limits. If a real breeding population of 500-pound primates existed, they would leave a massive ecological footprint, one we simply haven't found. Every living creature needs 3 things to survive: food, a stable climate, and enough territory to find a mate without inbreeding. A creature the size of Bigfoot would require thousands of calories a day, leaving behind stripped bark, animal carcasses, and massive amounts of waste. Yet, in the most remote corners of the Cascades or the Himalayas, we find plenty of bear scat, but zero evidence of primate biology. Furthermore, any species requires a minimum viable population to avoid extinction, hundreds of individuals roaming a landscape crawling with human hikers. In the age of high-definition trail cameras and ubiquitous smartphones, the lack of a single, clear, undisputed photo becomes a statistical impossibility. This leads us to a more uncomfortable question. Why do thousands of seemingly rational people claim to have seen something that shouldn't exist? Science suggests that the wild man isn't living in the woods, but in the complex architecture of our own sensory processing. Under stress or in low-light conditions, our brains perform pattern completion, filling in the blanks of a blurry shape with our deepest fears. Many sightings occur in the liminal spaces of nature dawn, dusk, or the edge of a dense fog where the eyes easily play tricks. Cultural conditioning also plays a role. We see Bigfoot because our culture has given us a template for what a forest monster looks like. But even if the physical creature is a ghost, the idea of the creature serves a vital purpose in our modern, sterilized world. We have paved over the wild places and mapped the terra incognita, leaving no room for the monsters that once occupied our maps. By holding on to the legend of the Yeti or Sasquatch, we are actually mourning the loss of the truly unknown and the truly wild. It is a psychological rebellion against a world where everything is known, categorized, and sold back to us in a digital format. We want there to be a giant in the woods because it means the world is still big enough to hold secrets we can't explain. If we ever truly prove these creatures didn't exist, we might find that we've lost something far more valuable than a biological specimen. Even as we dismantle the physical possibility of the Bigfoot, the natural world continues to offer up genuine biological surprises. In the late 20th century, we discovered the Saola in Vietnam and the giant megamouth shark lurking in the deep ocean. These discoveries remind us that while a giant ape is unlikely, the Earth is still remarkably good at hiding its secrets. The real monsters of our world are often stranger than fiction: microscopic tardigrades that survive space, or fungi that control minds. Perhaps the search for the Yeti is actually a search for a version of ourselves that isn't tethered to a desk or a screen. We project our desire for freedom onto a creature that answers to no one, pays no taxes, and leaves no digital trail. To the scientist, the lack of evidence is a conclusion. To the storyteller, the lack of evidence is just a better plot. We must balance our skepticism with a sense of wonder, for a world without mystery is a world where curiosity goes to die. If we stop looking for the giant in the woods, we might stop looking at the woods altogether, losing our connection to nature. The value of the legend isn't in its truth, but in the way it forces us to pay attention to the silence of the trees. Every time a hiker pauses because of a strange sound, they are engaging with the wild in a way that data cannot capture. Science has mapped the DNA and the terrain, but it cannot map the feeling of being watched by something unseen. This tension between the known and the felt is the space where humanity has always lived, between the firelight and the dark. As our cities grow and our forests shrink, these legends become more like conservation efforts for our own sense of awe. We protect the habitat of the monster because, in doing so, we protect the habitat of our own imagination and spirit. So, the next time you find yourself deep in the wilderness and the wind carries a sound you can't quite identify, you can choose to see the world through the lens of cold probability or through the lens of ancient, flickering possibility. Is there a giant ape hiding in the shadows of the Pacific Northwest or the crags of the snowy Himalayas? The evidence says no, but the human heart beating in the chest of a former primate isn't so sure it wants an answer. Because as long as the forest is deep enough to hide a giant, it is deep enough to hide a dream.